how do countries really get what they want in the world? Is it, always about military strength or economic power?
That's a fundamental question, isn't it? We often see the headlines about tanks and trade deals that's hard power.
Right. But is there something else, a different kind of influence?
Exactly. There's this idea of drawing others in, of attraction.
And that's what people call soft power. Today, that's our focus. We're doing a deep dive into a specific source that looks at this regarding the U.S. and how some recent actions might have impacted it, according to the views in that source.
And just to be really clear, this deep dive is based purely on excerpts from an Agence France Presse article, the AFP, titled "Trump Undermines U.S. Soft Power."
Yeah, that's crucial. We're unpacking what this AFP report presents, the arguments, the examples, the different perspectives, exactly as they reported them.
Our goal here is to walk you through this source material, pull out the key insights so you can get a quick handle on the viewpoints it contains about U.S. soft power and policy choices.
And understanding this stuff is really valuable, whether you're just trying to stay informed on global affairs or maybe even studying for something like the UPSC mains, where these kinds of international relations debates are pretty central.
Definitely. So the AFP piece itself, it starts by defining the term. It actually quotes the late political scientist Joseph Nye. He's the one who coined soft power back in the 80s.
And how did he define it?
Nye said it's a country's ability to achieve its goals through attraction, making its culture or values appealing, rather than using coercion, payment, or military force.
So influence through appeal, making others want what you want.
Precisely.
And the core argument the AFP article digs into, based on the critics it cites, is that certain administration actions risk doing the exact opposite, maybe undermining that very appeal.
That's the central tension the AFP report explores, and it uses several specific examples from its reporting to illustrate this.
Okay, let's get into those examples. What areas did the AFP report focus on first?
Well, it looked closely at education and cultural institutions. It reported on that quite controversial attempt to block Harvard University from enrolling international students.
Yes, I remember that. Harvard has such a huge global reputation. That move got a lot of attention.
It certainly did, and the article notes that a federal judge did step in and put a temporary hold on it. But AFP uses this example to talk about the bigger picture academic exchange as a tool of soft power.
And did the report include reactions to that?
Yes, it quotes Senator Jeanne Shaheen. She's quoted quite strongly in the piece criticizing the move. AFP reported her saying, "International students contribute to our economy, support U.S. jobs, and are among our most powerful tools of diplomacy and soft power."
So she saw it as damaging.
Very much so. The quote continues, saying this, "Reckless action does lasting damage to our global influence." The AFT article even mentions prominent grads like Canada's Mark Carney or Taiwan's President Lai Ching-te people who studied at Harvard as examples of these global ties.
That really puts a face on it. And the scale. Were there many international students affected?
Oh, huge numbers. According to figures the AFP piece cited, these students aren't just a few people. They made up about a quarter of Harvard's enrollment then, and often pay higher tuition, so it's a big revenue source too.
Wow, a quarter?
Yeah. And across the U.S., the Institute of International Education data, as reported by AFP, showed over 1,125,000 foreign students in 2023-24.
A record, actually.
A record number. Where were they coming from mostly?
The top countries, according to the report, were India, China, and South Korea. And many studying things like math, computer science, engineering. Think about the connections that builds.
Definitely. But the AFT article, it presented the other side too, right? The administration's view.
It did. It reported the administration's perspective that some universities, Harvard included, had become, and this is the term used in the report, breeding grounds for leftist extremism.
Okay.
And that they were allegedly wasting money on diversity and inclusion efforts. There's a quote in the piece from State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce reflecting this view.
What does she say? The article reports her expressing concern about sending a kid to Harvard and getting back someone changed, someone primed to be a fabulous left-wing activist, but they're maybe not going to be able to get a job.
So a really starkly different view of the role and impact of these universities.
Exactly. The AFT report really lays bare that clash. Are these institutions key assets for global attraction, or are they seen negatively through this different America First lens described in the piece.
And it wasn't just universities the article mentioned.
No, the AFP piece also reported on criticisms aimed at major cultural institutions, like the Smithsonian museums accused in the report of ideological indoctrination, and even the Kennedy Center.
Institutions that are often seen as, showcases of American culture globally.
Right. Then the AFP report moves on, looking at foreign aid and wider international engagement.
What did it say there?
It reported on directives that called for pretty deep cuts in foreign aid programs.
Okay, cutting aid. But was there a rationale provided in the report?
Yes, the article includes the defense offered by Secretary of State Marco Rubio. He's quoted from a hearing, saying the aim wasn't to dismantle American foreign policy, not to withdraw us from the world, but more about making aid effective under an America First approach.
Maximizing effectiveness from a national perspective.
That seems to be the framing reported, but again, you see the tension with Nye's idea of attraction. The piece also mentioned the scaling back of some university research programs.
Raising fears of.
Well, according to the report, it raised concerns among some academics about a potential brain drain, top researchers perhaps looking elsewhere.
I see. Any other areas of engagement mentioned?
The AFP article also touched on reported attacks on media outlets, specifically mentioning the silencing of Voice of America.
VOA, yeah. That has a long history.
A very long history of projecting American views worldwide. So that was another point the source raised.
Okay, so we've got education, culture, aid, media. What else did the AFP piece cover?
It then looked at trade and cultural exchange, another area where these soft power dynamics were apparently playing out, according to the reporting.
And the example here was?
A striking one from the AFP report, the threat of a 100% tariff on foreign-produced movies shown in the U.S.
100% tariff on movies, like Hollywood movies.
Well, potentially even big American ones if they were filmed abroad. The article used a really specific example, Tom Cruise's Mission Impossible, The Final Reckoning.
Mission Impossible. But that's a huge U.S. franchise.
It is, but that particular film, the report notes, was largely shot in places like Britain and South Africa, so under that threatened tariff.
Wow, that would have had a massive impact. It really shows how interconnected everything is.
Exactly. The AFP report kind of links these ongoing trade disputes and also criticisms of international alliances, citing critics who felt these things were damaging America's global image, even in some cases reportedly affecting things like foreign tourist numbers.
Okay, so all these examples, the students, the aid cuts, the movie tariffs, they all feed back into the main theme.
Precisely. They all lead back to the AFP piece discussing Joseph Nye himself and his framework. It reminds us of his definition again. Influence through attraction, not coercion or payment.
And did Nye himself weigh in, according to the report?
Yes. The article mentions an email exchange AFP apparently had with Nye back in February, not long before he passed away.
And what was his assessment?
As reported by AFP, Nye gave a pretty direct take on the approach he was seeing. He's quoted as saying the president only thinks in terms of coercion and payment.
Only coercion and payment. That's quite a statement from the man who defined soft power.
It is. And Nye added, according to the report, that this perspective ignores a really crucial source of American influence over the decades.
Which is?
His final point quoted in the article was, our success over the past 8 decades has also been based on attractiveness.
Based on attractiveness.
That really underscores his core idea. Did the AFP report mention how other countries reacted?
It touched on that briefly. For example, it reported China's reaction to the Harvard situation.
What was their take? The report characterized China's view as seeing it as politicizing education, something they believed would only tarnish its own image and reputation in the world.
Interesting. So bringing it all together, what's the main takeaway from this AFP source?
Well, the article essentially sets up this clear contrast, this tension. You have, on one side, the reported America First approach focusing on direct national benefit, leading to actions like aid cuts, scrutinizing institutions, using tariffs.
Right.
And on the other side, you have the perspective of critics cited in the piece, seemingly backed up by Nye's own assessment within the report, arguing that these very actions undermine influence that comes from attraction, from cultural ties, from cooperation, basically, the opposite of soft power as Nye defined it.
And we've just presented those different viewpoints as they appeared in that specific AFP article.
Exactly. That's key.
So this deep dive, based completely on that AFP report, Trump undermines U.S. soft power, walked us through how the article looked at education, culture, aid, trade.
And included Nye's own perspective and some international reaction, all drawn directly from that source.
And understanding these different angles, these competing views, as presented in a source like this, it's really crucial, isn't it, for anyone trying to make sense of international relations today?
Absolutely. It shows the debates around national influence, what really constitutes strength. And for anyone, keeping up with current affairs, maybe for general knowledge or even specific prep like UPSC mains or prelims, engaging with source-based analysis like this is super helpful.
It gives you the different arguments straight from the reporting. Okay, let's leave you with a final thought to mull over, based only on the ideas presented in this AFP source we've discussed. The article quotes Joseph Nye saying, U.S. success has historically been based on attractiveness. Now, considering the specific actions the piece described, like the moves on student visas, the scrutiny of cultural bodies, the aid cuts, the tariff threats, and the different views on their impact, how fundamentally might a nation's global standing, its long-term relationships, be reshaped if its focus shifts primarily towards what Nye in the report called coercion and payment, or that America First approach centered on direct national gain, as discussed in the article?
Yeah, that's a big question about the nature of power in the 21st century. Lots to think about there.
Indeed. If you found this deep dive useful for understanding these complex issues through the lens of this particular source, please do consider liking and subscribing.
And if you have more questions or maybe other source material you'd like us to tackle in a future deep dive, definitely let us know in the comments.
Absolutely. And remember, this entire discussion was based on the source material from the AFP article titled, Trump Undermines U.S. Soft Power.